In 2007, Apple launched an iPhone with no App Store, no copy and paste, and no way to install any third-party software. Steve Jobs stood on stage and said developers could just build web apps instead. The audience gave him a golf clap. What happened next changed how every phone on Earth works. Here is every iOS version, what it added, and why it mattered. iPhone OS 1. No App Store, no copy-paste, no third-party apps. The original iPhone launched with 16 built-in apps and no way to add more. Safari, Maps, YouTube, Mail, iPod, that was it. Steve Jobs told developers they could build web apps through Safari instead of native apps. He called it the full internet in your pocket. The audience gave him a golf clap. The phone also had no copy and paste, a feature every other phone on Earth already had. Users complained immediately. Apple's response was essentially, you don't need it. It took 2 years before they admitted that was wrong. iPhone OS 2. The App Store changes everything. 1 year later, Apple reversed course entirely. On July 10, 2008, the App Store launched with exactly 500 apps. Within the first weekend, those apps were downloaded 10 million times. The App Store did not just change the iPhone. It created an entirely new industry. Developers who built the right app at the right time made hundreds of thousands of dollars in weeks. The App Store also introduced the iPhone SDK, so developers could build real native software. From the moment it opened, every phone maker on Earth started planning their own version. iPhone OS 3. iPhone OS 3 finally delivered what users had been demanding since day one: copy and paste. Android had shipped with it from the start. Apple made it work elegantly. Press and hold, drag the handles, copy. The crowd at the announcement cheered like it was a moon landing, which says everything about how badly they had wanted it. iPhone OS 3 also added MMS, voice memos, video recording on the 3GS, and push notifications. It was the update that made the original iPhone feel complete. Then iOS 4 arrived and took something back from older devices. iOS 4. Multitasking arrives and destroys the iPhone 3G. iOS 4 was the update that renamed the platform from iPhone OS to iOS. It introduced multitasking, folders, a unified inbox, FaceTime, and home screen wallpapers. A genuinely great update for iPhone 4 and 3GS owners. For iPhone 3G owners, it was a disaster. The iPhone 3G could technically install iOS 4 but could not run it. Apps took 30 to 60 seconds to open. Answering a call required swiping the slider multiple times before it responded. Apple investigated the reports but never offered a downgrade path. A lawsuit followed. iOS 4 on the iPhone 3G became one of Apple's most documented software failures. The next update changed the iPhone's independence entirely. iOS 5, iMessage, and Siri arrive. Before iOS 5, every iPhone needed to be plugged into a computer to set up and sync. iOS 5 ended that. It introduced iCloud, which meant backups, contacts, and photos synced without a cable. It introduced iMessage, Apple's own messaging platform running over the internet, free, between Apple devices. SMS was not dead yet, but the countdown had started. iOS 5 also introduced Siri, the first mainstream voice assistant on a smartphone. Siri could set reminders, answer questions, send messages, and make calls by voice. Nobody knew quite what to do with it at first, but within a year, every other phone maker was building their version of it. The next update tried to replace Google. It did not go well. iOS 6, Apple Maps, the most embarrassing launch in Apple history. iOS 6 removed Google Maps from the iPhone and replaced it with Apple Maps. On launch day, Apple Maps gave wrong directions to real places. It placed bridges in bodies of water. It listed airports in fields with no airports. The CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, publicly apologized and told users to try competitor apps while Apple fixed it. A product launch so bad that Apple's own CEO told users to go use Google. That had never happened before and has not happened since. iOS 6 did add genuinely useful things: passbook for tickets and boarding passes, do not disturb, expanded Siri, but none of that was the story. Apple Maps was the story. And the next update tried to change the conversation by redesigning everything on screen. iOS 7, the biggest visual redesign in iPhone history. iOS 7 was the most dramatic change to the iPhone's appearance since the original. Johnny Ive replaced the previous skeuomorphic design. Textures, leather, glass effects, with flat, thin, minimal. Bright colors, translucent panels, simple icons. Half the users loved it immediately. Half wanted the old one back. Both groups adopted it anyway. iOS 7 also added Control Center, AirDrop, and CarPlay. It was one of the fastest adopted iOS updates ever despite the controversy. Within 2 years, Android had redesigned itself in the same direction. The next update added a feature iPhone users had been waiting 7 years for. iOS 8, third-party keyboards 7 years late. The original iPhone launched in 2007 with one keyboard, Apple's. For 7 years, there was no other option. iOS 8 finally opened the keyboard to third-party developers. SwiftKey, Gboard, and dozens of others were available within days. iOS 8 also added extensions, HealthKit, HomeKit, and continuity features across Apple devices. It was a significant update. It also had a significant problem. 1 week after launch, Apple pushed iOS 8.0.1. The update broke cellular service and Touch ID on iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus. Apple pulled it within hours. Fewer than 40,000 units were affected before the patch was yanked. iOS 8.0.2 restored everything 2 days later. The damage to Apple's reputation for software quality lingered longer. The next update made up for it by making every iPhone last significantly longer. iOS 9, low power mode and the battery that finally lasted. iOS 9 introduced low power mode, a setting that reduced background activity, visual effects, and screen brightness to extend battery life significantly. When battery dropped to 20%, the iPhone offered to enable it automatically. For the first time, running out of battery on an iPhone felt manageable rather than inevitable. iOS 9 also improved performance on older devices and reduced the storage required for updates. It introduced proactive suggestions, Siri beginning to learn habits and surface relevant apps before you searched for them. Smaller things, but all of them pointed toward a phone becoming genuinely smarter about its owner. The next update tried to make the iPhone genuinely more social. iOS 10, iMessage gets reactions, teenagers go wild. iOS 10 gave iMessage reactions, full screen effects, stickers, invisible ink, and handwritten messages. You could send fireworks across someone's screen. You could press and hold a message and tap a heart. Teenagers immediately made these the most used features on the phone. The update also redesigned the lock screen, added a home app for smart home control, and opened Siri to third-party developers for the first time. Universal Clipboard, copy on iPhone, paste on Mac, arrived quietly and became one of the most useful things Apple ever shipped. The next update changed the most used interface element on the entire phone. iOS 11, the control center, nobody asked to change. The control center before iOS 11 was 3 separate pages. iOS 11 merged everything into one customizable panel, accessed with one swipe. Users complained for weeks, then got used to it. iOS 11 also added screen recording, a Files app, and ARKit for augmented reality, but it shipped with more bugs than any recent update. A bug auto-corrected the letter I to a symbol in every message users typed. It took Apple 6 weeks to fix something visible in every sentence. iOS 12 was Apple's public acknowledgement that quality had slipped. iOS 12. Apple admits performance matters more than features. iOS 12 was the first iOS update in years where Apple explicitly deprioritized new features to fix existing ones. They publicly committed to making older devices faster and more reliable. They delivered apps opened up to 40% faster on the same hardware. The iPhone 5S, released in 2013, felt meaningfully quicker on iOS 12 than it had on iOS 11. iOS 12 also added screen time, parental controls that let parents set daily limits on specific apps. It took approximately 48 hours for children worldwide to discover workarounds. Group FaceTime for up to 32 people, Siri shortcuts, and Memoji also arrived. The next update finally gave iPhone users something Android users had carried over them for years. iOS 13, Dark Mode, 5 years after Android. Android introduced system-wide dark mode in 2014. iOS 13 arrived in 2019. That is 5 years of Android users mentioning it in every iPhone conversation. Dark mode was the single most requested iOS feature for years. The day it arrived, millions of people turned it on and never turned it back off. iOS 13 also brought a redesigned Photos app, Sign In with Apple, and major performance improvements. It was also the version where iPad split off into its own operating system, iPadOS. The next update finally changed the home screen for the first time in 13 years. iOS 14, widgets on the home screen 13 years after the iPhone. The iPhone launched in 2007 with a grid of app icons. Every iOS version since then had the same grid. Android had customizable home screens with widgets from 2008. iOS 14 finally allowed widgets alongside apps in 2020, 13 years. iOS 14 also added the app library, which organized all apps automatically. Picture-in-Picture let videos keep playing while you used other apps. And an indicator dot finally showed when the camera or microphone was active. That last one mattered more than it seemed. The next major update 2 years later redesigned something users stared at 100 times a day. iOS 16, the lock screen nobody recognized anymore. iOS 16 let users customize the lock screen for the first time. Font choice, color, widgets directly on the lock screen, multiple lock screen profiles tied to different focus modes. Within days of launch, tech Twitter was full of screenshots of people's lock screens. None of them looked the same. Messages gained the ability to edit and unsend texts, a feature that required an immediate renegotiation of every argument that had ever been had over text. Apple also introduced passkeys as a replacement for passwords, and AirDrop defaulted to contacts only after 10 minutes, ending the era of strangers receiving memes in public. The next update tried to make the entire iPhone feel new again without redesigning anything. iOS 17, standby mode, and the update that felt genuinely new. iOS 17 introduced Standby, a landscape display mode that activates when the iPhone is charging, a clock, widgets, photos, live activities. The iPhone on a nightstand became a smart display. Contact posters let users design how they appeared on other people's screens during phone calls. NameDrop shared contact details by holding two iPhones close together. Widgets became interactive without launching their apps. None of these were dramatic changes individually. Together, they made the phone feel genuinely different to use daily. Then the next update promised to change everything with AI. iOS 18, Apple Intelligence and the AI iPhone. iOS 18 introduced Apple Intelligence, AI built directly into the operating system, writing tools that rewrote and summarized text across every app, notification summaries that compressed stacks of alerts into single lines, an upgraded Siri with broader knowledge and system-level actions, a cleanup tool in Photos that removed unwanted objects from images. iOS 18 also let users place app icons anywhere on the home screen for the first time. After 17 years of the grid, you could finally leave a gap. RCS messaging arrived, letting iPhone and Android users exchange high-quality photos and videos without compression. iOS 18 was the first version where AI was not a feature. It was the layer underneath everything. If that Android comparison kept coming up and you want to know that side of the story, the next video is already on screen.